Mr. Chairman, and also the gas forum. And it's great to be in Poland again, just on a personal note. I love the country, and it's quite beautiful, so it's always a pleasure to be here. And I think also our president has indicated the same thing, so it's quite a warm country. Today what I'm going to speak about is the shale gas revolution. And when I say the shale gas revolution, of course I don't necessarily want to be too optimistic, but shale gas really has the potential to change the European gas market in many different ways. So before a single well...
You have to move a little bit, yeah.
On the right, because you look...
Oh, yes, excuse me, okay.
No problem.
Okay. Yes, so before even a single gas well has been drilled, shale gas, the potential of it, has still changed the European gas market, and it has impacted the ways that many importing countries as well as many of the major exporting countries have decided to develop their plans, their strategy in order to sell to Europe for the future. Now, just to go into several of the main factors of the shale gas revolution, we can look at three main factors. One is a drop in demand. This has really caused a gas glut, and the drop in demand, of course, was due to the global financial crisis when Europe, of course, began to redirect LNG cargoes, and also its natural gas demand dropped precipitously. And then, at the same time, there was an increase in the U.S. unconventional natural gas production. Now, the U.S. had its own shale gas revolution, and of course, if we use this as a type of model, we can see that perhaps the potential for Europe is great. So the U.S. more or less became energy independent in terms of natural gas. So the U.S., at least from the early part of the 2000s, it was predicted that it was going to import major amounts of LNG. But due to the shale gas production and unconventional gas, such as coal and methane, pipe gas, and so on, the U.S. is now natural gas independent, at least for the next 60 to 80 years. Now this, of course, on its own, had an impact on the European gas market simply because the U.S. was no longer importing gas, and this put downward pressure on the global natural gas price, or LNG price, actually. And then also there was the arrival of new LNG capacity. So many of the gas exporting countries had constructed new LNG terminals and so on, and as a result, this increased the gas glut because much more LNG was on the market. And we can look at Qatar, for instance, we can look at Indonesia, and even Russia to a certain extent, and see how this has actually played out. Now, all these factors have caused the gas glut, and basically this overcapacity of LNG has led LNG to become less expensive than pipeline gas. And if we compare this to basically the long-term contracts that are utilized. But yet, there are still many factors that must be considered before we attempt to even transplant this revolution to the European market. And many of the factors that are most important within the European context are, number one, I would say, is actually population density. So population density in Europe is much higher than it is in the U.S. And also the European, how can I say, citizenry tends to be a bit more environmentally conscious than in the U.S. So as a result, the green movement, at least in Western Europe, is an extremely powerful movement. So there's been hues and cries about the environmental impact of shale gas production, hydrofracturing, and so on. So this really has a potential in terms of how the public views shale gas production to inhibit some of this future production from coming online. And so environmental legislation within the European context, I would say, needs to be tweaked. And perhaps there needs to even be some type of general EU legislation to be able to protect the environment, but at the same time still enable investment to be made within this very critical sector to allow European diversification, as well as to allow European goals to be met in terms of decarbonization of the economy and what have you. And the role of Fukushima in this, I think that Fukushima will have two main impacts. One is that there has been a reassessment in the wake of Fukushima of the role of nuclear energy within within the domestic economy. So all across the EU, there has been a reassessment of the role nuclear energy will play. But at the same time, though, I think that on a certain deeper structural level, the role of Fukushima would be that perhaps many people will not want to sacrifice environmental goals for their energy requirements. So even though, of course, natural gas is not, shale gas production is not as dangerous potentially as nuclear energy, but at the same time with this issue of hydrofracturing and perhaps contamination of underground water supplies, this could lead the populace to even question whether we should even promote shale gas production at the risk of our environment. So this is a very important issue. And also secondly, in contrast to the US, the EU does not have nearly as comprehensive and reliable geological studies about its potential shale gas. So this is another issue. So the US has been fairly well mapped in terms of discovering where the shale gas is and so on, but within Europe this has not been the case. So there's still many questions as to how much potential shale gas can be produced and where the major finds are. There are some ideas, but it's not nearly as well advanced as the US is. And also there's the issue of best practices. And when I say best practices, this is more in the sense of lessons sharing and knowledge transfer between the US market and also the European market, because the US market right now is actually the most advanced in terms of understanding how to exploit unconventional gas reserves. So Europe is catching up right now, and of course it's attempting to license technology from the US and so on. But as of yet, there are still certain difficulties in attempting to, let's say, exploit the knowledge that the US shale gas industry has acquired over several years. But despite the foregoing, the implications of the potential immense shale gas finds that can transform how Europe views and how Europe consumes energy. And several of the main issues to consider with this, when we look at the impact of shale gas, is that European unconventional gas is thought to be at least price competitive when compared to the current long-run average European contract prices of about $8 to $9 more or less MMBtu. Of course, I'm not considering this against the spot price, the LNG spot price, but against the long-term contractual price. Perhaps shale gas could be competitive when compared against that. But at the same time, shale gas is still unlikely to develop before 2020. So these immense potential shale gas reservoirs in Europe still are quite unlikely to be brought online before 2020. So 2020 perhaps would be the most optimistic date that we could set, or target date. But it could still mean that the tight gas, that shale gas and coal bed methane, in the most optimistic scenario, could compensate for this declining indigenous conventional gas production within Europe. Now, if we look at the estimated total recoverable reserves in Europe, this amounts to roughly between 33 to 38 trillion cubic meters. So this is the prediction and or the estimate of it. And it's estimated from this about 12 trillion cubic meters are made up of tight gas, about 15 TCM are made up of shale gas, and roughly about 8 TCM is made up of coal bed methane. And this is compared to about the total conventional gas reserves in the EU of about 2.42 trillion cubic meters. So in theory, if we look at Europe's unconventional gas resources, it might be enough to meet European gas demand for at least the next 60 years. So this has profound implications for Europe's energy future and how it views energy security, and also its relations with major natural gas exporting countries. And Russia is not the only one. It could also be Algeria, and also other countries that are attempting to position themselves to export LNG or even pipeline gas to the European market. But even if only a fraction of these shale gas reserves are brought online within Europe before, let's say, 2020, it would still have significant repercussions. So even if we use a type of pessimistic assessment of how much shale gas can be brought online, still the impact that it would have is that it could undermine some of the more high-priced New Siberian gas fields within the Yamal Peninsula, and also in particular Russia's Arctic offshore natural gas reservoirs. because this tends to have a fairly high production cost. So shale gas could actually be competitive when compared to that. And also would offer the EU another domestic source of gas. And this would also enable greater diversification of gas imports. And of course, the EU has politicized more or less energy diversification. So this is a strategic goal for the European Union. And then the shale gas, any shale gas production within Europe would also extend this global overcapacity that we have in the natural gas market right now. So more or less the global gas glut, and this would perhaps last until 2020 or thereafter. So shale gas production in the EU, even if it does not meet the most optimistic assessments, would still be able to improve the EU's energy supply security over the next few decades. But for all of this to happen, it's essential that public acceptance is considered, just as much as geology or economics or the market structure of the European natural gas sector. However, I think that's an important issue is that we need to look at the geopolitical impact of any shale gas production within Europe. And this has the potential to evolve the industry structure in what I perceive to be a much greater degree than what is commonly understood. Major producers and major importers will have to change their mindset to adjust to this new reality. And unconventional gas could prove to be a major challenge, as I indicated earlier, to the traditional exporters. And Russia, of course, figures quite prominently in this, but also Algeria and some other countries. So between 2020 and 2030, it's estimated that Russia would have to revise its strategic outlook for natural gas exports to the European market. And some of the major issues or the major strategic considerations that Russia will have to think about would be either one, to defend its existing market model and pricing framework, two, whether it would seek to perhaps marginalize the unconventional gas production within Europe. And perhaps one way that it could do this would be to change its current focus on using a type of oil indexed and long-term take-or-pay contracts. So it might need to adapt to a much more flexible pricing system in order to challenge any potential shale gas from coming online. And this latter point actually illustrates that even before a single well is drilled within Europe, even the threat to the unconventional gas production in Europe could lead to a positive outcome for European consumers. So how could this happen? Simply that just the rhetoric of shale gas, major shale gas production coming online within Europe has caused several things to occur. One is that the European gas prices are currently being renegotiated and revised. And also this has a bit to do as well with obviously the gas glut within the global natural gas market. And one of the ramifications as well of these new strategic considerations has been that an average of about 15% of Gazprom supplies have been delinked from oil indexation. So I think that's a very important issue that has arisen. And also in the fourth quarter of 2010, Russian gas exports to Europe declined by about 17%. And this, of course, is due to redirected LNG cargoes and also due to the unseasonably warm weather. So we can see that how there has been immediate impact on traditional natural gas exporters to Europe. So if major supplies were to come online, then this impact would be even greater. And in the wake of the Fukushima disaster, of course, shale gas could give a substantial push to this new European reassessment of depending on nuclear energy as part of its decarbonization plans. And just to give you a broad overview of some of the major shale gas exploration sites within Europe, we can see that, of course, Poland has been in the news lately for potential shale gas production, potentially immense finds, and also northern Germany, France, the UK, Austria, and Hungary. Although in France, we know quite recently that that they have banned hydrofracturing in France. So there is a fear that in Poland at least, that France can push for the European Commission to develop some type of overall ban on hydrofracturing, although I don't think this is the case because the European Commission simply does not have that authority. But as of yet, we can see where this concept of NIMBY, at least what we call in the U.S., which means not in my backyard, this means when there is local opposition to some type of industrial project, whether it's oil production or natural gas production or what have you. So in France, this has proven to be quite strong. Although in Poland, I don't think this is necessarily going to be a significant issue, simply because in Poland, the diversification drive and the energy security drive is extremely strong. And I think that this would be able to counteract any type of environmental concerns that may arise. And just to give a closer picture of areas in Poland that have already been licensed for shale gas exploration, we can see that, of course, in the north and in the east, these are major areas under consideration. But despite the potential of shale gas, there are still several issues that we really have to think about as to whether shale gas is really a game changer or not. It's still unclear of what the restructuring efforts of the European gas market would actually promote unconventional gas development to be a key element of the European energy mix of the member countries, especially within Central and Eastern Europe. And as I indicated earlier, obviously these environmental concerns are coming to the forefront, and they have even come to the forefront within the United States, with several states considering a ban on the production of unconventional gas, and New York has promulgated a moratorium on future shale gas production. So even in the U.S., these issues are coming to the forefront, and I predict that it's going to become much more important over the coming years. But at the same time, I think that the natural gas industry is going to utilize best practices to be able to mitigate some of the more extreme environmental consequences of producing this unconventional gas. And there's also a shortage of advanced, up-to-date technology and equipment in Europe. So this is ongoing at the moment. So we see a type of technology transfer which is occurring from the U.S. to Europe, particularly within Eastern Europe. At the same time, the technology has not reached the level of the U.S. But this is going to occur over time. So I'm confident that perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years, there's not going to be a substantial difference between European shale gas technology and American technology. There's also been a lack of investment, obviously, and also established business practices, because Europe simply has not had the type of experience with production of shale gas that the U.S. has had. So there's still a bit of ambiguity as to even how to go about to develop these unconventional gas resources. But still, the potential is great for shale gas production within Europe. And we only have to look at North America as a type of model. Now, the shale gas revolution within the U.S. has enabled the United States to become independent within the natural gas sector. Now, this is absolutely phenomenal because we have to remember that perhaps way back to about 2002, 2003, the U.S. was slated to become a major LNG importer, and now is energy independent due principally to this new unconventional gas production. And just the fact that the U.S. has begun to produce immense amounts of shale gas, and of course in 2009 the U.S. overtook Russia as being the world's major natural gas producer. So this is something I think that is quite significant. But the shale gas production within the U.S. and also the global financial crisis, and also the coming online of major LNG infrastructure has really led to this glut, which of course caused a downward pressure on global gas prices around the world. So even if the European shale gas revolution does not occur in its most optimistic scenario, still the shale gas development within the U.S. has irrevocably changed the global gas market nonetheless. But as indicated, it's still quite unlikely for shale gas to come online in a significant way in Europe prior to 2020. But in my estimation, if Europe takes a very proactive strategy, it's my view that it would be able to meet its diversification aims as well as its carbon mitigation requirements for the future. Thank you very much.
Congratulations for very precisely 20 minutes speech, like in the, like in the time when you watch. Congratulations. Są pytania. W Polsce, in Poland, the problem of shale gas was very widely disputed. So, everybody knows everything better than the specialists.
Yes, of course. It's widely spoken about.
After reading a lot of material, a lot of articles about that, everybody is a specialist. In Poland, we say that we have the most common profession in Poland is the doctor, medicine doctor. Just now, the shale gas specialist is the most popular profession in Poland. So, dziękujemy bardzo panu Justinowi. I zapraszamy pana Andrzeja Konoplanika, który nastawia właśnie